The whole world knows of Alexander Pushkin. He is the most famous Russian poet. He also wrote prose and novels. His portrait is familiar to all. Over many years, Pushkin's literature has been translated into all foreign languages. We Russians have been taught his poems since childhood. At school and literature classes, we read his poems with an artistic expression. We liked his romantic poems of love when we were young. His poetry built the personality of every Russian and enriched the Russian language and sensual perception of the world. Pushkin's poetry is an integral part of Russian culture. People of different ages love, learn, and memorize Pushkin's verses. For many of his poems, accompanying music has been written. Almost all the major poems were made into operas, for example, Ruslan and Lyudmila, The Tale of the Tsar Sultan, The Tale of the Golden Cockerel, Evgeny Onegin, Boris Godunov, Dubrovsky, and many others. Pushkin was born in Moscow on June 6, 1799. He was the son of a poor landowner Sergei Lvovich Pushkin. Pushkin's mother, Nadezhda Osipovna Ганнибал, was the granddaughter of an Abyssinian, a native of Africa, named Ibrahim. As a little boy, Ibrahim was brought as an exotic gift to Tsar Peter the Great. The boy received the surname Ганнибал, and when he grew up, he became a military engineer. Pushkin's grandmother, Maria Alexeyevna, and his nanny, a serf peasant, Anna Rodionovna, cared for little Alexander. They knew many folk tales and songs and awakened a love for Russian folk poetry and for wonderful ancient fairy tales and songs in his soul. Many of these tales and stories Pushkin subsequently retold in his poems. Pushkin learned to read early both in Russia and in French. In the house of the Pushkins, as in most of the educated aristocratic houses in Russia at the time, French was used in conversation on a par with Russian, and the children used the French language as their native language from an early age. Pushkin's father had many French books. Little Pushkin climbed into his father's office and read his books with enthusiasm. Already in childhood, he knew French literature perfectly. His schoolmates called him Frenchman. Pushkin's father loved literature and theater and even composed French poems. Pushkin's uncle, Vasily Lvovich, was quite a famous poet. The best writers of the time, Zhukovsky, Karamzin, visited the Pushkin house, constantly talked about literature, the theater, and discussed new poems and plays. Thus, from early childhood, Pushkin listened to their arguments and learned to understand good poetry. He himself tried to write in French, but did not show his poems to anyone except his sister Olga. In 1811, when Pushkin was 12 years old, he was taken to the town of Tsarskoye Selo near St. Petersburg and sent to a school for children of aristocratic families, which had just opened and was called Lyceum, Lycée. This school was completely different from the then ordinary schools. About 30 boys studied there. Each of them had a separate small room. They were taught by the best teachers and professors. Teaching lasted 6 years, so the boys became friends and fell in love with their lycée. Pushkin wrote, "The whole world is a foreign land to us. Fatherland to us is Tsarskoe Selo." In the lycée, Pushkin began to write poetry in Russian. Very soon, comrades and professors understood that among them was growing a great talent. In addition to Pushkin, other boys, future talented poets Delvig, Kuchelbecker, wrote poems, but Pushkin eclipsed them all with his poems. He wrote many and worked hard on his poems. All his poems were written in a clear and beautiful Russian language that was lovely and often very witty. The rumor about the little Pushkin, who while still sitting on the school bench wrote wonderful poems, spread among the best writers of the time. Zhukovsky, Batyushkov, Pushkin's uncle Vasily Lvovich, and others came to Lycée to visit the young poet. In the years of Pushkin's life at the Lyceum, Russia experienced the Patriotic War of 1812 with the invading hordes of the French Emperor Napoleon. He reached Moscow itself, but after a few months he was forced to leave it. The heroic events of the Patriotic War of 1812 Pushkin described in the poem Memories in Tsarskoe Selo. In January 1815, an open public exam was held at the Lycée. Relatives of the student were invited, and important persons were present, headed by the Minister of Education himself. The most honored guest was the poet Derzhavin, the great poet of the 18th century, the pride of Russian literature at that time. At this exam, Pushkin read his new poem, Memories in Tsarskoe Selo. In this poem, Pushkin talks about the victories of Russian weapons in the past and in recent times of the Patriotic War of 1812. Pushkin read his poem with extraordinary animation, standing 2 steps from Derzhavin. Derzhavin, with delight and tears in his eyes, rushed to kiss Pushkin and blessed his curly head. Pushkin graduated from the Lycée in 1817. At that time, he was already a real poet and just 18 years old. Coming out of the Lycée, Pushkin lived in St. Petersburg, enrolled in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and eagerly indulged in the entertainments of city life. He constantly attended theaters and danced at balls. He was short, slender, very dexterous and strong, unusually lively and agile. He swam perfectly, fenced with swords, and rode horses. He was not good looking, but he had extraordinary eyes, brilliant and expressive. When he was fond of something interesting, his face became beautiful. He especially loved the theater. During these years, Pushkin wrote his first major work, the fabulous poem Ruslan and Lyudmila. In it, he combined grandmother's and nanny tales with impression of French and Italian magic poems and novels, decorating them with his own imagination. A lot of adventures, each one more interesting than the last, written in simple and easy Russian. The poem was written in such beautiful language as no other could match at that time. When the poem Ruslan and Lyudmila was printed and read, Pushkin's fame spread throughout Russia. Readers eagerly awaited new works from him. The famous poet Zhukovsky presented his portrait to Pushkin with the inscription, "Willing student from a defeated teacher." Pushkin was very fond of the common Russian people who recently defeated Napoleon and liberated Europe. He was very worried, seeing injustice in the serfdom of the people from the landlords. The young poet did not know how to achieve freedom and a happy life for the Russian people. He began to write sharp poems and epigrams about the Tsar himself and his entourage. These poems were not printed, they were copied and memorized. The Tsar and the government eventually became aware that Pushkin wrote revolutionary poems, that everyone read them, and that the youth admired them. So it was decided to deal with Pushkin. St. Petersburg governor, General Count Miloradovich, called for him. Prior to this, Pushkin's servant had already warned him that they had come and offered him 50 rubles to view Pushkin's revolutionary poems. Hence, Pushkin burned all his revolutionary manuscripts. Pushkin was brave and truthful, saying to the Count, "You will not find anything in my apartment, but everything is here." And he showed a finger on his forehead. "Give me the papers, and I will write everything." The general was struck by such boldness, and Pushkin wrote a whole notebook. For these verses, the Tsar wanted to put Pushkin in prison or to exile in Siberia. Pushkin's friends, Zhukovsky, Karamzin and others, began to help him and asked the Tsar through his entourage about Pushkin. And punishment of Pushkin was softened. He was left free, but expelled from St. Petersburg to the south. So, in 1820, in the spring, the exile of Pushkin began. Pushkin thought that he was sent for a short while, that no more than 6 months later he will return to his friends and relatives. But Pushkin's exile lasted for 6 years and captured the best youthful years of his life. Actually, the first months of the exile were not very restrictive. He received permission to live a whole summer in the family of his friend, the son of the hero of the patriotic war, General Raevsky. With this family, Pushkin made a trip to the Caucasus and to Crimea. Then he moved to Chisinau, where he lived for 3 years. He wrote to his friends asking them to help a return to his homeland. But Emperor Alexander I refused all requests. However, his friends managed a transfer from the small town of Chisinau to Odessa, a large, beautiful city, where lived a lot of educated people and where there was a good theater and opera. They thought that Pushkin would live easier and have more fun there. Pushkin began to work in the office of a small official, and his chief, Count Vorontsov, did not appreciate his poems and treated him disparagingly. Pushkin was extremely proud and hot-tempered and did not allow himself to offend anyone. He began to write evil epigrams about Vorontsov, which all repeated quietly. Vorontsov became angry and wrote a denunciation to St. Petersburg to remove Pushkin from Odessa. Pushkin was retired from service and told to go immediately to the family estate Mikhailovskaya, belonging to his father. This estate in 1742 was granted by Empress Elizaveta Petrovna to the great-grandfather of Pushkin, Abram Ganibal. The village was in Pskov province, and Pushkin had to live there without the right to live under the strict supervision of the authorities. So, in summer 1824, the second exile of Pushkin began. In Mikhailovskaya, Pushkin was in full solitude. There were no friends or interesting educated people near him. He lived together with his old nanny, Irina Rodionovna. Also, Mikhailovskaya was not far from St. Petersburg and Moscow, but his friends feared to visit him, because he was exiled to the village by the order of the Tsar for revolutionary verses and for being an atheist. He was constantly followed by a police spotter in Mikhailovskaya. It was dangerous to show friendship with this political criminal. But two of his friends, the poet Delvig and the future revolutionary Pushkin, were not afraid to visit him. Friends feared for him, thinking that he would perish in the wilderness alone, but poetry saved him. Poetry is like an angel comforter. I was saved, and I was resurrected by my soul. At that time, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin wrote a poem, K, with I remember wonderful moment on the first line. This poem was addressed to Anna Kern, the wife of the commandant of the Riga fortress, the hero of the Patriotic War of 1812, 56-year-old General Yermolai Fedorovich Kern. The first time Pushkin saw Kern was long before his forced seclusion. The meeting took place in St. Petersburg in 1819. Anna Kern made a lasting impression on the poet. The next time Pushkin and Kern saw each other again was in 1825, when Kern was visiting her aunt Praskovya Osipova in the city of Trigorskaya, next to Mikhailovskaya, where Pushkin stayed during his exile. It is believed that the new meeting, held after such a long break, inspired Pushkin to create a landmark poem. It is known that the autograph of the works of Pushkin were personally presented to Anna Kern before her departure from Trigorskaya. The poem was written no later than July 19th, 1825. In 1840, the composer Mikhail Glinka wrote a romance based on Pushkin's poem, devoting it to his beloved Catherine Kern, daughter of Anna Kern. Pushkin's poems, in combination with Glinka's music, became very famous. I translated this song into English with help from my husband. In 2018, I, with Russian design company August van der Waltz, created a calendar where, for the first time, I published my translation of this song. This year, I decided to sing it for this program about Pushkin.
I remember my last moment you appeared in front of me as a fleeting vision of pure brilliant beauty, of pure brilliant beauty, in the anguish of hopeless sadness, in the disquiet of noisy bustle. I heard your gentle voice and dreamed of your lovely features, and dreamed of your lovely features. Years passed, the rebellious storm scattered my previous reverie, and I forgot your tender voice, your heavenly features, your heavenly features. In the wilderness, in the gloom of isolation, my days passed quietly, without the Almighty, without inspiration, without tears, without life, without love, without tears, without life, without love. My soul is awake once more, and again you appear to me as a fleeting vision of pure brilliant beauty, of pure brilliant beauty. And my heart pulsates with adoration, and inside resurrected again God Almighty and inspiration, and life and tears and love. God Almighty and inspiration, and life and tears and love. I remember a marvelous moment you appeared in front of me.
While Pushkin lived alone in his village, he was homesick, bored, angry with friends and relatives that they hadn't helped him. Suddenly, the main persecutor of Pushkin, Emperor Alexander I, died. At the moment of accession to the throne of his younger brother Nicholas I, young revolutionaries, mostly military, decided to raise a revolt against autocracy. On December 14, 1825, the day the troops were to swear to the new emperor, several revolutionary regiments came to the huge Senate Square in St. Petersburg near the monument to Peter I and refused to swear to Nicholas. Nicholas found out about this conspiracy in advance and managed to gather the army sworn to him. The rebellion was suppressed. Suddenly, on September 1st, 1826, a military officer came to Mikhailovsk and announced to Pushkin that he must accompany him to Moscow immediately. Pushkin was brought directly to the palace where Nicholas I received him. Pushkin behaved very boldly with the Tsar. When Nicholas asked him what he would do if he were in St. Petersburg on the day of the uprising on December 14, Pushkin said without fear that he would join the ranks of the rebels. Apparently, Nicholas I very much wanted to reconcile with Pushkin and probably gave him all sorts of promises about his future reign. Because by the end of their conversation, Pushkin shook his hand. From this moment, the exile of Pushkin, which lasted more than 6 years, from spring 1820 till autumn 1826, was ended. In the evening, Pushkin appeared in the theater, and the whole audience looked only at him, ignoring the stage. At this time, Pushkin's diary contains recordings: the evening at Zhukovsky, at Adayevsky, at Karamzin, where Pushkin read his new poems that he wrote in Mikhailovsk. Literary evenings, readings, literary lunches, and dinners were a characteristic phenomenon of the epoch. At such evenings, intelligent people did not play cards and spoke Russian, not French or German. After returning from exile to St. Petersburg, the poet visited many good acquaintances, including the family of Lenin. The version of the popular Pushkin's poem I Loved You is dedicated to the daughter of the president of the Academy of Arts and director of the Imperial Public Library Alexei Nikolaevich Lenin. Pushkin liked to visit the house of Alexei Nikolaevich Lenin after he finished studies in the Lyceum and knew his daughter as a child. During the years of separation, Anna Alexeyevna turned into a young lady who had many admirers. The poet was very interested in her, but his feeling remained unanswered. Then Pushkin wrote the poem I Loved You, addressed to the once beloved woman, and filled with regret and male pride. Anna Lenin's granddaughter claimed that in grandmother's album there was a handwritten poem I Loved You by Pushkin. 2 dates were recorded below this poem: 1829, when the poem was written by Pushkin in her album, and 1833, with her mark. More than perfect, long ago. I also translated this poem into English with help from my husband. And in 2018, with the Russian design company August van der Waltz, created a calendar where for first time I published my translation of this song. I loved you. I created the arrangement for this song and sang it after my visit to St. Petersburg in the summer of 2019. I created the video clip.
I loved you. Love is still perhaps in my heart, not completely extinguished. But do not let it move you anymore. I do not want to sadden you with anything. I love you silently, hopelessly, with timidity and jealousy long wished. I loved you so sincerely, so tenderly. How can God allow another to love you? So sincerely, so tenderly. How can God
According to its composition, the poem divided in two different parts. One of them is lyrical monologue in 7 lines, where the hero repeats 3 times, I loved you, I loved you, I loved you. The second part of the poem is lyrical wish. How God allowed her to be loved by another. When we understood that his love was not finished and he hopes for reciprocity. He's making it clear that probably she will not meet so reliable and faithful love how he loved her, but he wishes how God led you to be loved exactly as I love you. This program about Pushkin created by Irina Millbery.